Maya, a hardworking young woman, has always carried the weight of the world on her shoulders, sacrificing everything for her family. But when she meets Liam, a man from an entirely different world, she's forced to confront the choice between survival and trusting someone for the first time. Will she continue her relentless fight alone, or will she take a chance on a future that could change everything? Get ready for a powerful journey of struggle, trust, and transformation that will keep you on the edge of your seat. Where are you watching from? Don't forget to subscribe for more. Maya's footsteps echoed softly in the grand lobby of the Harrison Plaza Hotel, a space so pristine and polished that it seemed to glow in the early hours of the morning. She adjusted the worn straps of her cleaning apron, feeling the weight of it against her shoulders as she moved silently across the marble floors. It was just after midnight, the time when the hotel's luxurious guests retreated to their suites, leaving only the soft hum of air conditioning and the occasional clink of glasses from the rooftop bar. While the world outside was still, Maya worked. She had worked these late shifts for as long as she could remember, trading sleep for the promise of a paycheck, all for the sake of her family. Her mother's illness had taken away every ounce of normalcy in her life, and now, at 25, Maya was stuck in a cycle she could see no way out of. The pristine hotel lobby, with its towering chandeliers and polished floors, was a constant reminder of the divide between the life Maya had been born into and the life she was destined to serve. The wealthy guests who passed through the hotel's grand entrance rarely noticed her, just another invisible worker among many. They had no idea of the sacrifices she made, how her dreams had been reduced to mopping floors and scrubbing bathrooms, how the cost of her mother's treatment meant there was never enough for her younger sibling's school supplies. Some nights, as she pushed her mop across the floor, Maya thought about how different her life could have been if she had chosen a different path, if she had stayed in school and chased the future she once imagined for herself. But that life was no longer hers to have, and she had long accepted that fact. The world didn't care about people like her. It cared about the ones who could afford to live in luxury, the ones who could sit in fine dining rooms and spend money without a second thought. As she cleaned the luxurious lobby, Maya's thoughts drifted to her mother, who was in a cramped hospital room somewhere across town, fighting a losing battle against an illness that drained not only her strength, but their savings as well. Maya had given up everything to care for her. Her college dreams, her freedom, her own desires, and all she had left was this endless grind. Every paycheck went to her mother's medical bills, and every month the rent seemed to rise, while the food on their table shrank. The weight of responsibility pressed down on her, but Maya didn't dare complain. Complaining wouldn't change anything. The world wasn't kind to people like her, but Maya had learned to survive. She had to survive. Her mind wandered back to the night before, when she had glimpsed the group of wealthy men stumbling toward the elevator. Their laughter had echoed through the lobby, loud and arrogant, their expensive suits and wristwatches sparkling in the dim light. One man in particular caught her eye, a tall figure with dark hair and a sharp jaw, flashing a designer wristwatch as he boasted to his equally drunk friends. Maya didn't know much about luxury brands, but even she could tell that watch was worth more than her entire annual salary. She couldn't help but feel a bitter pang in her chest, the divide between her world and his world, so vast it seemed impossible to bridge. But as she swept the floor, she pushed the thoughts aside, focusing on her work. This was her reality. No matter how loud the laughter of the rich guests was, it couldn't drown out the hum of her struggle. Later that night, after most of the guests had retired to their suites, Maya continued her shift, lost in her own thoughts. She swept the lobby, the faint squeak of her worn-out sneakers, the only sound beneath the clatter of the cleaning cart. She barely noticed when the group of men returned from the bar, laughing and stumbling toward the elevator once more. But as they passed, something caught her eye. a glint of metal on the floor. It was a watch, the one she had seen the arrogant guest flashing earlier. The same one that had glittered under the hotel lights like a jewel, mocking her poverty. Her heart skipped a beat. The watch gleamed in the dim light, its surface reflecting her conflicted expression. She crouched down, picking it up carefully, her fingers brushing against the cold metal. In that moment, she could feel the weight of it, literally and figuratively, pressing down on her palm. $1 million, or so the man had boasted, and there it was, lying on the floor, unattended. A single piece of jewelry worth more than everything Maya had worked for in her life. She could feel the temptation rising in her chest, suffocating her with the thought of what this money could do for her family. It could pay for her mother's treatment. It could take care of her siblings' education. It could give them a better future. Something they had never had. But as Maya stared at the watch, her heart pounded in her chest. She had two choices: keep the watch, pocket the fortune, and disappear into a life of luxury she had never imagined, or do the right thing and return it. Maya swallowed hard, her mind racing with conflicting thoughts. She knew what the logical choice was. Taking the watch could change everything. But deep down, she knew she could never betray her own values, no matter how difficult her life had been. There were things that money could never replace, and her integrity was one of them. With a deep breath, she clenched the watch tightly in her hand and made her decision. It was time to do the right thing. The next morning, the hotel was quieter than usual, with only the soft hum of air conditioning and the occasional sound of footsteps echoing through the hallways. Maya entered the suite for her routine cleaning shift, her hands already moving with practiced efficiency as she straightened the bed and wiped down surfaces. The luxury of the room didn't faze her anymore. It was just another part of her job. She had seen it all. The gilded furniture, the crystal chandeliers, the lavish amenities that catered to the world's elite. None of it was for people like her. It was all for the guests, who came and went, leaving their footprints on the polished floors, unaware of the countless hours spent by people like Maya to keep the illusion of perfection intact. As she made her way across the room, her eyes caught something on the floor near the bedside table. At first, she thought it was just another forgotten item. A pair of sunglasses, maybe a crumpled receipt. But when she knelt to pick it up, her breath caught in her throat. It was the watch. The very same one that the man from the night before had been so eager to flaunt, spinning it between his fingers like it was some kind of trophy. The luxury watch gleamed in the morning light, the polished surface reflecting Maya's conflicted face. Her hands trembled as she held the watch, feeling its weight against her palm. She had never seen anything so valuable up close. The man had boasted it was worth millions, a number that seemed almost impossible to comprehend. The temptation to keep it surged through her, threatening to overwhelm her resolve. For a moment, Maya was frozen, staring at the watch as her mind raced. Her mother's medical bills were piling up, and her younger siblings needed school supplies. The weight of responsibility was always heavy, but this could change everything. The money from the watch could pay for her mother's treatments, clear the mounting debts, and give her family a chance at a better life. She could finally escape the endless cycle of struggle that had defined her existence. The thought was intoxicating, like a dark cloud settling over her. The world would never notice if the watch went missing. The man who had carelessly left it behind probably had 10 more just like it. He wouldn't even notice its absence. Maya could sell it, disappear, and never have to worry about money again. But as she turned the watch over in her hands, a voice inside her whispered that it wasn't hers, that the watch belonged to someone else, and keeping it would make her no different from the people she despised, the ones who exploited the labor of others for their own gain. Her heart raced in her chest, each beat pounding louder than the last. She had worked so hard for so long, always keeping her head down, always trying to do the right thing. Was it really fair to deny herself this one chance at a better life? Was it wrong to take something that was practically begging to be taken? She could already hear the voices of her family in her head, telling her that she deserved better, that they all deserved better, that they all deserved better. But then she thought of the person she would become if she gave in. She thought of her values, the integrity she had worked so hard to maintain. No amount of money could replace that. Maya's grip on the watch tightened as she walked toward the lost and found office, the cool metal burning against her skin like a constant reminder of the choice she was about to make. Her heart was heavy, but her conscience was clear. She didn't want to face the man who had lost the watch. She didn't want to have to look him in the eye, knowing how easily he could replace what he had lost, while people like her struggled to survive. But she knew that wasn't the point. It wasn't about him. It was about her. It was about making a choice she could live with, even if it meant giving up something that could change her life. With a deep breath, Maya knocked on the glass window of the lost and found office. The clerk, an older woman named Mama Titi, looked up from her paperwork and smiled warmly at her. "Yes, my dear? What can I do for you?" she asked, her voice soft and kind. Maya hesitated for a moment, then placed the watch on the counter, pushing it forward as if it were something sacred, something that didn't belong to her but was now a part of her story. Mama Titi's eyes widened as she inspected the watch, her fingers brushing over it with reverence. "Ah, this is no ordinary watch," she murmured, her voice filled with awe. "Where did you find this?" she asked, her eyes flicking up to Maya's with a look of curiosity. Maya swallowed hard, her voice steady but quiet. "In one of the suites," she replied. "I was cleaning when I found it." Mama Titi looked at her with newfound respect. "You know, many people wouldn't have returned something like this," she said softly, her voice laced with approval. "Integrity is rare these days, my dear." Maya nodded, unable to find the words to explain the internal battle she had just fought. It didn't matter now. She had made her choice, and she was ready to face whatever came next. Maya stood at the counter, her hand still hovering over the watch she had just returned. It felt heavier now, as if it carried the weight of all the choices she had made in the past few hours. Mama Titi studied the watch with a level of reverence that made Maya feel even more uncomfortable. It wasn't just a watch. It was an object of desire, something that had the power to change everything in her life. But as she watched Mama Titi, Maya felt a small flicker of pride. She had done the right thing. She had chosen to hold on to her integrity, even when everything around her seemed to be screaming at her to take the easy way out. "Where did you find this, my dear?" Mama Titi's voice broke through her thoughts, drawing Maya back into the moment. She had been so lost in her own internal struggle that she hadn't even noticed the older woman inspecting the watch with keen interest. "In one of the suites," Maya replied, her voice steady, though her heart was still racing. "I was cleaning and found it on the floor." Mama Titi's eyes widened, and she leaned closer, her fingers brushing over the metal with something akin to awe. "This is no ordinary watch," she muttered, almost to herself. "It's a rare piece, worth more than most people will see in their lifetime." She looked up at Maya then, her expression shifting from curiosity to something more solemn. "You did the right thing, returning it. Not many people would." Maya didn't respond at first. She felt the weight of Mama Titi's gaze, but she couldn't bring herself to say anything more. It didn't matter now. She had made her decision. Still, the thought of the consequences of that decision gnawed at her insides, and the temptation that had nearly broken her resolve lingered in her mind like a ghost. There was a pause, a silence that felt too thick to bear. Then, unexpectedly, Mama Titi spoke again, her voice softer this time, laced with a knowing tone. "You know, You don't find many people like you in this world anymore. People who value honesty over everything else. She paused, her eyes locking with Maya's. You could have kept it, you know. No one would have ever known. The man who owns it probably has 10 more just like it. He wouldn't even miss it. Maya clenched her jaw, but her expression didn't change. She had heard enough of that kind of reasoning over the years. People telling her that it didn't matter, that no one would notice, that she deserved to have something for herself. But she had always known deep down that the moment she crossed that line, there would be no coming back. She couldn't live with herself if she let that happen. I didn't keep it because it wasn't mine, Maya said quietly, her voice firm. And it's not about what he would notice or not notice. It's about what I can live with. Mama Titi nodded slowly, a small approving smile forming on her lips. You have a good heart, she said softly. Not many people would do what you just did. Maya felt a small sense of relief at the older woman's words, but it was fleeting. She still had to deal with the reality of what would come next. She had no idea how Liam would react. She had seen the way he looked at her, the curiosity, the surprise when she had refused his money, the way he seemed to find her unapproachable, yet intriguing. It made her uncomfortable, but it also made her angry. She didn't want to be a puzzle for him to figure out, some riddle to be solved. She wasn't a game. She wasn't a game. She was a person, and she had made her choices for herself, not for anyone else. Just as she turned to leave, the phone on Mama Titi's desk rang, pulling her from her thoughts. Maya froze as Mama Titi picked up the receiver and spoke in a low, urgent tone. Yes, Mr. Adigbite, Mama Titi said, her voice carrying a hint of respect. We have something of yours. Maya's stomach twisted at the name. Adigbite. The heir to the Harrison fortune. The very man who had worn the watch the night before. Her chest tightened, and for a moment, she thought she might faint. She had hoped to return the watch anonymously, to avoid any confrontation with the man who had lost it. But now fate seemed to have other plans. Mama Titi's voice continued on the phone, but Maya barely heard it. All she could think about was the looming confrontation. She had returned the watch, yes, but now she had to face the man who had probably never known what it meant to go without, to live without the luxury of choice, to survive without a safety net. Maya clenched her fists at her sides. She wasn't afraid, but the situation was more complicated than she had anticipated. Before she could protest, Mama Titi hung up the phone and turned to her with a serious expression. The guest who lost this watch is still at the hotel. I need to report that it has been found. Maya's heart pounded as she felt a cold sweat form on her brow. She wasn't ready for this. She wasn't ready to face him. But there was no turning back now. Maya stood frozen as Mama Titi made the call, the name Adigbite ringing in her ears like an unwanted echo. She had hoped to slip away quietly, to disappear into the hotel's bustling corridors and forget about the watch. But now, fate had other plans. As Mama Titi hung up the phone, the reality of what was about to happen settled heavily in Maya's chest. The man who had carelessly left his watch behind, the one whose wealth and arrogance seemed to permeate every word and gesture, would be coming to retrieve it. And Maya would have to face him. Don't worry, child, Mama Titi said softly, noticing the way Maya's hands clenched at her sides. You did the right thing. No one can fault you for honesty. Her voice was meant to reassure, but it only made Maya feel more exposed. She had done the right thing, yes, but she hadn't anticipated the consequences. She didn't know how to face a man who was used to getting everything he wanted, someone who had probably never had to work a day in his life for anything. Would he see her as nothing more than a hotel cleaner, someone to be dismissed, her actions of no consequence? The door to the office opened, and Maya's breath caught in her throat. Standing in the doorway was him, the man who had worn the watch the night before. He was taller than she remembered, his dark eyes sharp behind his designer sunglasses, his posture confident, almost arrogantly so. The suit he wore was tailored to perfection, and even the way he entered the room seemed to exude an effortless control that made Maya feel small in comparison. She forced herself not to look away, but the tension in the air was thick, and her pulse quickened. "Mr. Adigbite," Mama Titi said warmly, gesturing for him to come in. "We have something of yours." Liam barely acknowledged Mama Titi's greeting, his eyes immediately locking onto Maya. She stood by the counter, her back straight, her expression neutral, but inside, her mind was racing. She had to remain calm. "You're the one who found it." Liam's voice was low, smooth, like velvet, but there was an undercurrent of something sharp in his tone. He took a step closer, his gaze never leaving Maya's. His presence seemed to fill the room, and for a brief moment, Maya felt herself shrinking beneath the weight of his scrutiny. She didn't flinch, didn't back down. "Yes," she said simply. "I found it in the suite while I was cleaning." Liam's brow furrowed slightly, his eyes narrowing as if trying to assess her. "You could have kept it," he said, his words almost casual, as if he were testing her. "It's worth a fortune. You didn't have to return it." Maya's heart pounded, but she kept her voice steady. "It wasn't mine," she replied firmly. "I didn't take what didn't belong to me." Liam studied her for a moment longer, the amusement in his eyes fading into something unreadable. His gaze softened ever so slightly, and there was a flicker of something in his expression, a curiosity, perhaps, or even respect. Maya couldn't tell, but it unsettled her all the same. She had expected him to be angry or dismissive, but he was neither. He was intrigued. He reached into his pocket, and before she could react, he pulled out a thick wad of cash, holding it out to her. "For your honesty," he said, his voice smooth as ever. "It's more than what you probably make in a year. Take it. You deserve it." Maya's eyes widened at the money, the sheer volume of it. It would be more than enough to cover her mother's medical bills, maybe even provide for her siblings. The temptation flared again, stronger this time, but she resisted it. This wasn't why she had returned the watch. She didn't need his charity, didn't want his pity. "I don't need your money," Maya said firmly, pushing his hand away. Her words hung in the air like a challenge, and for a moment, Liam seemed taken aback. He blinked, his expression faltering just briefly, before he masked it again with that same calm indifference. "It's just a thank you," he insisted, his voice tinged with a hint of confusion. "And I'm saying no thank you," Maya replied coolly, her tone leaving no room for argument. She didn't smile, didn't show any sign of gratitude, because the truth was, she wasn't grateful for his money. She was grateful for the chance to make her own decisions, to retain her dignity in a world that often tried to take it from her. For a long moment, Liam just stared at her, his hands still extended in the air, the cash hanging loosely between his fingers. It was as if he didn't know how to process her rejection, as if it didn't fit into the world he was accustomed to. One where people bent over backward to please him, where he could buy whatever he wanted without question. Finally, a smirk tugged at the corner of his mouth, his expression shifting to something more amused than anything else. "Interesting," he murmured, more to himself than to her. "Very interesting." Maya felt a flicker of irritation rise within her. She had done what she thought was right, and yet here he was, watching her like some kind of puzzle to be solved, as though her actions were nothing more than an entertainment for him. She didn't have the energy for this. She turned on her heel and made her way toward the door, eager to leave the room before any more of his games could unfold. As she stepped into the hallway, she couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't the end of their encounter. She had hoped it would be, but something in the way Liam had looked at her told her otherwise. This was just the beginning, and Maya wasn't sure she was ready for whatever came next. The next few days passed in a blur of activity, but no matter how hard Maya tried to focus on her work, she couldn't shake the memory of the encounter with Liam. It wasn't the money he had offered her. It was the look in his eyes when she rejected him. That quiet amusement, the way he seemed almost fascinated by her refusal. He was used to people bending to his will, to people doing whatever it took to please him. But she wasn't one of those people. And for some reason, that had seemed to intrigue him more than anything. She wasn't sure what to make of it. And honestly, she didn't want to know. Still, life went on, and Maya threw herself into her work as usual. Every shift at the hotel felt like a delicate balancing act, keeping her head down, staying out of the way, and making sure everything was spotless. She focused on the little things, the mundane tasks that kept her grounded in a world that was far too complicated for her taste. But even as she scrubbed and polished, she felt an unfamiliar weight on her shoulders. Every time she entered the lobby, she found herself scanning the crowd for him. Liam, his presence lingered, even when he wasn't there. She hadn't seen him since the incident with the watch, but something told her that this wasn't the end. It was the following Thursday when it finally happened. Maya had just finished cleaning a suite on the top floor and was heading back to the elevator when she saw him standing in the lobby. Liam. His sharp suit and expensive watch were impossible to miss. But it wasn't just his appearance that caught her attention. It was the way he was watching her, his gaze following her every move, as if he were trying to figure her out piece by piece. She stopped in her tracks, frozen for a moment, unsure of what to do. Should she keep walking, pretend like she didn't notice him, or should she face him head on? Her instinct told her to avoid him, to walk away and pretend like he didn't exist. But something inside her, something that was slowly unraveling, made her do the opposite. She took a deep breath and walked straight toward him, her head held high, forcing herself to ignore the flutter in her chest. Liam's lips curled into a small smile as she approached, his eyes gleaming with that same curiosity that had unsettled her before. "Maya," he said, his voice smooth, as if they were old friends. "We need to talk." She stopped in front of him, feeling the heat of his gaze on her. The lobby, usually filled with a hum of hotel staff and guests, felt suddenly too quiet, too intimate. She crossed her arms over her chest, guarding herself against whatever he might say next. "About what?" she asked, her voice firmer than she felt. Liam didn't seem to be in a hurry. He leaned casually against a marble pillar, looking her over with that same calm assessment. "I've been thinking," he started, his tone deliberate. "You're different. Most people would have taken the money. Most people would have run with the watch. But you didn't." He paused, letting the words settle between them before adding, "Why?" Maya's heart beat faster, the question hanging in the air like an unspoken challenge. She knew this was a game to him, one of his many tests, no doubt. But she wasn't interested in playing. She had already made her decision, and it was a decision that didn't need his approval. "Because it wasn't mine," she said simply, her voice steady despite the heat rising in her chest. "I'm not interested in your money, Liam. I returned the watch because it was the right thing to do, not because I wanted anything from you." Liam watched her for a long moment, the amusement in his eyes fading into something deeper, something more thoughtful. He straightened up, pushing away from the pillar, and for a moment, Maya thought he might leave, might finally accept that she wasn't the kind of person who could be bought. But instead, he surprised her. I'm not offering you money, he said, his voice quieter now, almost reluctant. I'm offering you something else. Maya frowned, her brow furrowing slightly. And what would that be? Liam smiled, but it wasn't his usual confident grin. It was softer, more vulnerable. A chance, he said, his gaze never leaving hers. A chance to get out of this. He gestured vaguely at the hotel lobby. This life. You've got potential, Maya. I can help you. You don't have to keep struggling. Maya's stomach twisted at his words. The offer was tempting, too tempting. She had been struggling for so long, working double shifts, sacrificing everything for a family that depended on her. It was hard to imagine a life without that constant weight. But she knew what this was. It wasn't help. It was control. Liam didn't offer help, unless there was something in it for him. I don't need your help, Maya said, her voice hardening as she spoke. I'm doing just fine on my own. Liam seemed to pause, processing her words. The easy smirk he wore so often had faded, replaced by something that looked almost like respect. All right, he said after a beat, his tone different now. But I won't stop offering, Maya. I see something in you. And when you're ready, I'll be here. Maya didn't reply. Instead, she turned on her heel and walked away, her steps quick and purposeful. She could feel his eyes on her, but she refused to turn back. She had made her choice. She wasn't going to let Liam Odegbite or anyone else change that. She didn't need to be saved. She didn't need to be saved. She needed to survive on her own terms. And that, she thought as she walked down the hallway, was enough for her. Maya tried to shake off the lingering weight of Liam's offer, but it seemed to follow her, clinging to the edges of her thoughts, no matter how hard she worked to push it away. Every day felt like a battle between what she wanted and what she needed. And as much as she hated to admit it, Liam's offer tempted her in a way she hadn't expected. The promise of a life free from the constant grind, free from the worry of bills and hospital visits. It was a dream that many people would have jumped at. But Maya wasn't like most people, and she knew it. It was during one of those long, grueling shifts at the hotel when the tension between them finally reached a boiling point. She had been cleaning the lobby again, moving quickly between tables, making sure every inch of the space was spotless before the early morning rush. She was almost finished when she saw him. Liam, sitting in one of the plush chairs by the bar, his gaze fixed on her as he sipped a drink. The usual air of arrogance and control was still present, but there was something else now, something deeper beneath the surface. She didn't want to engage. She didn't want to acknowledge him, but the truth was, she couldn't ignore him forever. His presence had become too constant, too insistent. She moved past him, keeping her gaze trained on the floor, hoping he wouldn't stop her, hoping he wouldn't stop her, hoping he wouldn't say her name. But of course he did. Maya, he called out, his voice smooth but laced with something that Maya couldn't quite place. She paused, unwilling to look up, but knowing it would be impossible to avoid him if she didn't. She took a deep breath, steeling herself. Yes. Liam didn't stand up, but his eyes were fixed on her, studying her like she was a puzzle he was trying to solve. I've been thinking, he began, his tone casual, but there was an edge to it, something that made Maya's pulse quicken. You've been avoiding me, and honestly, I don't get it. Maya's hand tightened around the cleaning supplies she was holding. She couldn't quite bring herself to look him in the eye. I'm not avoiding you, she said, her voice tight. I'm just working. Liam smirked, his lips curling up in that familiar, infuriating way. Sure, you're working, but you're also running away from something. For me. He leaned back in his chair, never breaking eye contact, like he was daring her to admit it. You know I can help you. You know I can offer you everything you've ever wanted, Maya. She felt her chest tighten, and a rush of anger surged through her. This again. He was persistent, relentless, as if he thought she would just fall into his arms at the first sign of his generosity. But Maya wasn't weak. She wasn't going to be bought. "I don't need your help, Liam," she said, her voice firm now. And this time, she did look at him. His eyes were so intense, so full of expectation, but she didn't back down. "I don't need anything from you." Liam's smile faltered for a moment, but only for a moment. He seemed to process her words, then stood up slowly, his movements controlled, deliberate. He was tall, imposing, and for a brief second, Maya felt a pang of doubt, of weakness. But she quickly shoved it aside. "You think you're the only one who struggles?" he asked, his voice quieter now, almost challenging. "You think you're the only one who has it hard?" He took a step closer, his gaze softening just a fraction. "I've spent my whole life running away from my own reality, Maya. But that doesn't mean I can't see yours. You don't have to keep carrying all of this by yourself. I'm offering you a way out." The words hung in the air between them, and for a moment, Maya was silent. She was so tired, tired of fighting, tired of struggling, tired of always being the strong one. She'd spent so many years being everything for everyone else, and sometimes it felt like she couldn't keep going. But she knew that accepting Liam's offer would mean more than just a change in her circumstances. It would mean changing who she was. She wasn't willing to do that, not for anyone. "I'm not running away from anything," Maya said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'm just doing what I have to do." Liam's eyes searched hers, as if looking for something, and for a brief moment, Maya wondered if he saw the cracks in her armor. But he didn't push her any further. Instead, he just nodded slowly, a look of quiet understanding in his eyes. "You'll change your mind one day," he said, and his voice held an odd mix of certainty and sadness. "You can't keep running forever, Maya." And with that, he turned and walked away, leaving her standing there, feeling more alone than ever. But even as the words echoed in her mind, she knew one thing for sure. She wasn't ready to let go of herself. Not just yet. She had made it this far on her own, and that, she realized, was enough. Days went by in a blur, and Maya found herself caught in a web of emotions she hadn't expected. Despite her attempts to keep her distance, Liam's presence seemed to haunt her at every turn. At work, in the corridors of the hotel, in the quiet moments when she was alone with her thoughts. He lingered in the background, his offer, his gaze, his unspoken challenge. And the more she tried to push him out of her mind, the more he crept back in. It was a constant battle, one that seemed to stretch on without end. One evening, after another long and exhausting shift, Maya was just about to clock out, when she saw him again. He was waiting by the entrance, leaning casually against the wall with his phone in hand. The cool, confident air he carried with him was still there, but this time, there was something different about him. His usual arrogance had softened into something more thoughtful, even slightly wary. Maya's heart skipped a beat, and before she could stop herself, her legs carried her toward him. "Maya," he said when he saw her approach, his tone lighter than usual. "I need to talk to you." She stopped in her tracks, her body tense, unsure of what this conversation would bring. It had been days since they last spoke, and part of her had hoped that maybe, just maybe, he would let it go. But of course, Liam wasn't one to walk away from a challenge. "What's this about, Liam?" she asked, her voice steady, though the flutter of uncertainty lingered at the edges of her words. Liam pushed off the wall and stood up straight, meeting her gaze. "I've been thinking," he began, his expression more serious than she had seen before. "You got a lot of pride, Maya. I respect that. But at some point, pride doesn't change anything. It doesn't change the fact that you're still struggling, that your mother is still sick, that you're doing everything you can and it's still not enough. Maya's chest tightened at his words. He was right, in a way. She had been fighting so hard for so long, trying to keep her family afloat, trying to keep her head above water. And no matter how hard she worked, it always felt like she was just one step away from drowning. She could feel her walls starting to crack, the exhaustion and frustration she had been bottling up threatening to spill over. But she refused to let him see it. She couldn't let him see it. She couldn't let him see how badly she wanted what he was offering. "I didn't ask for your help," she said, her voice firm, though her heart betrayed her. "I didn't ask for anyone's help. I can do this on my own." Liam's expression softened, and for the first time, there was a trace of something genuine in his eyes. "I'm not offering help because you can't do it on your own," he said quietly. "I'm offering it because I know you're tired. Because I can see the weight of everything you're carrying, and I don't want to see you break under it. I don't want you to keep pushing yourself until there's nothing left." Maya's breath caught in her throat, the weight of his words pressing down on her like a ton of bricks. She had always prided herself on her independence, on the strength she had built through years of hardship. But now, standing here in front of him, with his words seeping into her, she felt that strength waver. She felt the vulnerability she had buried deep inside rise to the surface. Liam took a step closer, his voice lower now, almost pleading. "You don't have to do it alone, Maya. Let me help. Let me help. Let me make things easier for you." Her hands shook as she clutched the strap of her bag, the desire to say yes bubbling up inside her. But her pride held her back, holding her in place, refusing to let her give in. "I don't want you to help me because you feel sorry for me," she said, her voice tight with emotion. "I don't want to be just another person you try to fix." Liam's face darkened slightly, but he didn't back away. "I don't feel sorry for you," he said softly. "I respect you, and I admire you. I just want to make sure you don't lose yourself in this fight. You deserve more than just surviving, Maya. You deserve to live." The words hit her harder than she expected. She had spent so much time fighting to survive, to keep everything from falling apart, that she had forgotten what it meant to actually live, to have a future that wasn't weighed down by bills and endless sacrifices. For a moment, she felt the temptation to step forward, to take the hand he was offering. It was so easy. It would be so easy to give in, to let him take care of everything. But that wasn't who she was. She had fought too long and too hard to let someone else take control now. "I'm not ready," she whispered, the words tasting like defeat, even as she said them. "I need to do this on my own." Liam didn't push. He didn't argue or try to convince her otherwise. Instead, he nodded slowly, his expression unreadable. "I'll be here when you're ready," he said, his voice low and steady. "I won't give up on you, Maya." And with that, he turned and walked away, leaving her standing there, alone with her thoughts. The battle inside her raged on, but for the first time in a long while, she wondered if maybe, just maybe, she didn't have to fight it alone. Maya spent the next few days in a daze, her thoughts swirling in a haze of confusion and doubt. Every time she walked through the hotel, her mind would inevitably wander back to Liam's words. "You deserve more than just surviving." Those words echoed in her head, repeating on a loop, as if the universe itself were demanding that she reconsider the choices she had made. She had always been so determined to do it on her own, to protect her independence, but now, with everything piling up, the pressure of her mother's health, the growing list of unpaid bills, the weight of her own exhaustion, it felt as though she might break under the strain. It felt as though she might break under the strain. The hotel was quieter than usual that afternoon when Maya finished her shift, the usual bustle replaced by the calm hum of the air conditioning. She was ready to escape, to put the day behind her and collapse into the comfort of her tiny apartment when she saw him again. Liam. He was standing by the glass doors, watching her from a distance, his expression unreadable. Something about the way he was looking at her made her stop in her tracks, her heart skipping a beat. For a moment, she thought about walking away, ignoring him completely. But she couldn't. Not this time. Not when she had so many things left unsaid, things she had been pushing down, refusing to confront. She had promised herself that she wouldn't let him get under her skin, but there was something in the way he had spoken to her that day. Something that made her wonder if she was making the right choice by pushing him away. "Maya," Liam said, his voice low, almost hesitant, as if he were waiting for her to make the first move. "We need to talk." She didn't say anything at first, just stood there, feeling the weight of his gaze on her. This was different from their usual encounters. There was no arrogance in his tone, no challenge in his words. For the first time, he seemed uncertain. Maya's throat tightened. She had no idea what to expect from this conversation, but she couldn't avoid it any longer. She nodded, taking a step closer to him. "What is it, Liam?" Her voice was steady, but inside, a storm was brewing.
She could feel her resolve weakening, the walls she had built around herself beginning to crack.
"I've been thinking," he started, looking at her with an intensity that made her feel as though he was peering into the very depths of her soul. "About what you said, about how you don't need my help." He paused, his gaze softening slightly. "I get it, Maya. I do. I respect that you want to do things on your own. But sometimes you don't have to do it alone." Maya's chest tightened, her emotions swirling in a dizzying mix of frustration and longing. She had been trying so hard to make it work, to juggle everything and keep her head above water. She had wanted to prove that she could handle it all, that she didn't need anyone. But deep down, she knew the truth. The truth that had been staring her in the face for so long. She wasn't invincible. She couldn't do it all on her own. "I've been pushing you away," Maya said quietly, the words spilling out before she could stop them. "But maybe it's because I'm scared. Scared that if I let anyone in, I'll lose myself. I don't want to rely on anyone. I don't want to be a burden." Liam stepped closer, his eyes full of understanding. "You're not a burden, Maya. You're not the first person to struggle, and you won't be the last. But you don't have to carry that weight alone. You don't have to keep pretending that everything's okay when it's not." Her heart hammered in her chest, a mix of fear and relief washing over her. She had spent so long holding on to her pride, telling herself that she could handle everything. But maybe it was time to admit that she couldn't. Maybe it was time to let someone help, to accept that she deserved more than just surviving. "I don't know if I'm ready," she whispered, her voice barely audible as if saying it out loud would make it too real. "I don't know if I can let go of all the things I've been holding on to." Liam's gaze softened, and he reached out, gently taking her hand. "You don't have to let go of everything. But you don't have to do it all alone anymore." The weight of his words settled over her like a warm embrace. And for the first time in a long time, Maya felt a flicker of hope. Maybe she wasn't as alone as she thought. Maybe, just maybe, there was a way forward. A way to finally let herself be vulnerable. To let herself be vulnerable. To let herself trust someone again. She squeezed his hand, the smallest of gestures, but it was enough. She wasn't ready to let go completely, but she was ready to take the first step. And for the first time in a long while, she felt the faintest glimmer of something more, something worth fighting for. The days after their conversation were a blur of emotions and uncertainty. Maya tried to focus on her work, keeping her mind occupied with the mundane tasks that had become her routine. But every time she closed her eyes, Liam's words echoed in her mind. You don't have to do it alone, Maya. She had told herself she didn't need help, that she was fine. But the truth was, she wasn't. The weight of her responsibilities had been suffocating her for so long that it had become hard to breathe. She'd always been so determined to carry the burden by herself, to prove that she could survive without anyone's help. But now, she was starting to wonder if that was enough. It was late one afternoon, after a particularly exhausting shift, when she walked out of the hotel to find him waiting for her again. Liam stood by his sleek black car, looking effortlessly composed as usual. Yet there was a sense of calm about him now that Maya hadn't seen before. His usual arrogance was gone, replaced by something more genuine, something that made her pause, her heart skipping a beat. Maya, Liam called as soon as he spotted her. His voice wasn't demanding or impatient, just soft, almost like an invitation. We need to talk. Maya stopped in her tracks, her body tensing in response. She had been trying so hard to avoid this moment, to avoid him, but it seemed like she couldn't outrun it anymore. With a deep sigh, she walked over to him, her pace slow but deliberate. She wasn't sure what he wanted, but she was certain of one thing: she wasn't ready to hear it. Liam didn't wait for her to say anything. He opened the passenger door of the car, offering her an unexpected gesture of kindness. "Get in," he said, his voice quieter now, almost gentle. "Let's go somewhere. I just want to talk." For a moment, Maya hesitated. She didn't want to get caught up in another one of his games, didn't want to be swept away by the ease of his world. But something in her stirred. Something in her stirred. Something that couldn't ignore the fact that she was so tired, so worn down by everything. She needed a break, even if it was just for a little while. With a deep breath, she climbed into the car, and Liam shut the door behind her with a soft click. The drive was silent at first, the only sound the soft hum of the engine as they weaved through the streets. Maya stared out the window, her mind racing, her heart conflicted. Liam seemed content to let the silence hang between them, his focus on the road ahead. It was only when they reached the outskirts of the city, driving toward a quiet park, that Liam finally spoke again. "I've been thinking about what you said the other day," he began, his voice calm but heavy with thought. "About how you don't need anyone, that you can handle everything on your own." Maya tensed at the mention of their last conversation. She had hoped it would be left in the past, that maybe it didn't matter anymore. But of course it did. Everything felt like it was weighing on her shoulders, every word, every look. She looked over at him, meeting his gaze for the first time since they got in the car. "I don't need your help," she said, though this time her voice lacked its usual conviction. "I've made it this far without anyone. I can keep going." Liam's eyes softened, a trace of sadness passing over his features. "But at what cost, Maya?" he asked quietly, his voice laced with concern. "At what cost do you keep pushing yourself to the edge? What happens when there's nothing left to give?" Maya's chest tightened as his words hit her with the force of a revelation. She had been running on empty for so long that she hadn't even realized how close she was to breaking. She had told herself that as long as she kept going, as long as she kept her head down and pushed through, everything would be okay. But it wasn't okay. She wasn't okay. "You're right," she whispered, her voice barely audible as the truth began to sink in. "I'm exhausted. I'm so tired of carrying everything alone. But I don't know how to stop." Liam pulled the car to a stop in the parking lot of the park and turned to face her. There was no judgment in his eyes, just understanding. He wasn't trying to fix her. He wasn't trying to fix her. He wasn't offering her anything she hadn't already heard 100 times before. He was just there, listening. "You don't have to stop," Liam said gently, his voice full of quiet empathy. "But you don't have to carry it all on your own. Let me help you, Maya. Let me help you, Maya. Let me be there for you, even if it's just in the small ways. You don't have to do everything by yourself." Maya's heart felt like it was going to burst. She had spent so long pushing everyone away, trying to protect herself, trying to prove that she didn't need anyone. But here, with Liam, it felt different. His words weren't an offer of pity or charity. They were an invitation to let go, even if just a little, to share the burden she had been carrying for so long. For the first time in ages, Maya allowed herself to breathe. It was a small step, but it was a step toward something she hadn't allowed herself to believe in for a long time. Hope. Maya sat in her small apartment, the weight of the day's events pressing down on her like 1,000 pounds. She had agreed to meet Liam again, to take that first step into a world she had never truly allowed herself to imagine. One where help wasn't a sign of weakness, but an opportunity for change. But as she sat there, alone with her thoughts, doubt began to creep in. Was she doing the right thing? Could she trust him? Every part of her told her to pull back, to stay in her lane and keep pushing forward as she always had. But another part of her, the part she had ignored for so long, whispered that maybe, just maybe, she wasn't meant to carry the weight of the world on her shoulders anymore. Maybe it was time to let someone in. The sound of the doorbell pulled her from her thoughts, and for a moment, she hesitated. Was she ready for this? Was she ready to face him again? To accept what he was offering? With a deep breath, she stood and walked to the door. She opened it to find Liam standing there, looking as composed as ever, his suit sharp, his expression unreadable. For a brief moment, he just stood there, looking at her, as if waiting for her to make the first move. "You look like you've been thinking a lot," he said, his voice soft but full of meaning. Maya didn't know how to respond. She wasn't sure how to explain the whirlwind of emotions that had taken over her since their last conversation. Part of her wanted to say something dismissive, something that would keep him at arm's length. But another part of her, the part she had been trying so hard to ignore, wanted to open up, to trust him in a way she had never trusted anyone before. "I have," she finally said, her voice steady but quiet. "I've been trying to figure out if I'm making a mistake." Liam nodded, as if he had expected that answer. "It's not a mistake," he said softly. "It's a choice. And sometimes the hardest part of making a choice is allowing yourself to believe that you deserve more than what you've been settling for." Maya swallowed, the lump in her throat threatening to choke her. She had spent so many years telling herself that she didn't deserve anything more than what she had, that she was meant to struggle, meant to sacrifice for everyone else, meant to keep going no matter how much it hurt. But now, standing in front of Liam, she wasn't so sure anymore. He stepped closer, his presence calming yet undeniably intense. "You don't have to do this alone, Maya. You've been carrying so much for so long, and I see it. I see the exhaustion in your eyes, the way you push through even when it feels impossible. But you don't have to keep doing that." His words felt like a balm to a wound she hadn't even realized was bleeding. She had never let herself believe in a way out, never let herself hope for more than the endless cycle of work and struggle. But Liam was offering her something different. He was offering her a way out, a chance at a future where she wasn't constantly fighting for survival. "I don't know if I'm ready," she whispered, her voice breaking slightly. "I don't know if I can just let go. I've spent so long being strong, being the one everyone relies on. What happens if I'm not that anymore?" Liam's gaze softened, and he reached out, gently taking her hand in his. "You don't have to stop being strong, Maya," he said, his voice filled with reassurance. "But strength doesn't always mean doing everything on your own. Sometimes, strength is allowing yourself to trust someone else, to lean on them when you need it." Maya felt a tear slip down her cheek before she could stop it. She quickly wiped it away, embarrassed by the vulnerability she was allowing to show. But Liam didn't pull back. He didn't judge. He just stood there, holding her hand, offering her the safety of his presence. I don't know if I can trust you, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. But I want to try. Liam gave her a small smile, his thumb brushing lightly over her hand. Maya looked at him, feeling the weight of everything she had been carrying begin to lighten, just a little. She wasn't sure where this would lead, or if she was ready to let someone in, but for the first time in a long time, she felt the possibility of something different, something better. She wasn't sure what the future held, but maybe, just maybe, it was time to stop running from it. Okay, she said finally, her voice steady despite the uncertainty. Let's take that first step. And with that, she let herself believe that maybe, just maybe, there was more waiting for her than she had ever dared to imagine. The days that followed felt like a strange mix of calm and tension. Maya had agreed to work with Liam, a decision that still lingered in the back of her mind, pulling at her resolve. She wasn't sure if she was making a mistake or if she was finally accepting something she had been avoiding for far too long. The life she had built, one of independence and self-reliance, was beginning to feel fragile, and yet she had no idea what stepping into Liam's world would truly mean. The first few days of working closely with him were a blur of meetings, schedules, and tasks that had nothing to do with the world she had known. The pace was unrelenting. The expectations high, but there was something different about it. It wasn't the luxury of his life that had caught her attention. It was the subtle shift in the way he treated her. He wasn't condescending or dismissive. He didn't look at her like a mere assistant, but like someone capable of more. He saw something in her that she wasn't sure she saw in herself. And yet, despite the new opportunities, a part of her still felt like an outsider. The pressure to prove herself gnawed at her. The fear that she would fail and disappoint Liam, weighing heavily on her shoulders. She had spent her entire life working so hard just to survive, but now, working with him, the stakes felt different. It wasn't just about getting by anymore. It was about keeping up with a world she had never been a part of. A world she was still trying to understand. One evening, after a particularly long day, Maya sat in Liam's office, staring at the stack of paperwork she'd been organizing for hours. Her mind was a blur of deadlines and to-do lists, her body exhausted from the endless cycle of responsibilities that seemed to multiply every time she turned around. She rubbed her eyes, trying to focus, when Liam entered, his usual composed demeanor slightly less sharp than usual. He closed the door behind him, his footsteps quiet on the floor. "You've been working non-stop," Liam said, his tone not accusing, but concerned. "You need a break, Maya." She didn't look up at him, still lost in the maze of her thoughts. "I'm fine," she muttered, pushing another folder into the stack. "There's still a lot to do." Liam's eyes softened as he walked over to her desk. He wasn't just offering her a break out of kindness. He was trying to get through to her, to make her see that there was more to life than pushing herself to the brink of exhaustion. "You're not fine," he said quietly, his voice calm but firm. "You're working yourself into the ground, and I won't stand by and watch it happen. You're important to me, Maya. You're important to me, Maya. You're more than just an assistant, and I want you to start realizing that." His words hit her harder than she expected. She'd always been the one people relied on, the one who carried the weight for everyone else. But in that moment, standing there, looking at him, something shifted inside her. Maybe she didn't have to be the strong one all the time. Maybe it was okay to take a step back and let someone else take care of her for once. "I'm not used to this," she said softly, her voice barely above a whisper. Liam smiled, a small, understanding smile that made her heart ache with something she couldn't quite explain. "You don't have to do it alone anymore, Maya." And it's okay to rest. It's okay to rest. It's okay to take a break. You're not a machine. Maya finally looked up at him, meeting his gaze for the first time in what felt like forever. She felt a rush of emotions, fear, relief, hope, and she didn't know which one was stronger. She had spent so much of her life doing everything for everyone else, trying to survive, trying to hold it all together. But now, standing here with Liam, a part of her realized that maybe survival wasn't all there was. Maybe she deserved more than just to get by. For the first time, she allowed herself to believe that maybe she wasn't meant to carry the weight of everything alone. Maybe, just maybe, she could let herself trust someone else. Not just Liam, but herself, too. Okay, she said, her voice steadier than it had been in days. I'll take the break. But I can't promise I won't work myself into the ground again. Liam chuckled softly, the warmth in his eyes making her heart flutter. I'm not asking you to promise anything. Just take it one step at a time. And for the first time in a long time, Maya felt like she could. Just one step at a time. Maybe that was enough. The days that followed were a blur of new routines and quiet realizations. Maya had agreed to take the job with Liam, to allow herself the opportunity to work alongside him, even though it still felt like stepping into a world that was beyond her reach. The whirlwind pace of the office, the constant demands of high-stakes meetings, and the overwhelming sense that she was always trying to keep up weighed heavily on her. But there was something else now, something she hadn't expected. Hope. A fragile, tentative hope that maybe, just maybe, there was a future beyond survival. Each day, as she sat at her desk, organizing schedules and making calls, Maya could feel the slow shift within herself. She was no longer just the hotel cleaner, the daughter with endless responsibilities. She was someone with potential, someone who mattered beyond the confines of her past. But even as she began to recognize her own worth, a part of her felt like an imposter. She wasn't used to being seen this way, not as a person with value, but as someone who could contribute to something larger than just getting by. Liam, too, had changed. He no longer treated her like an employee. He treated her like a partner. The respect he showed her, respect for her thoughts, her decisions, and her capabilities, was something Maya had never expected from someone so entrenched in a world of privilege. He could have easily dismissed her as just another assistant, just another cog in the machine of his empire. But instead, he took the time to listen, to include her in decisions, and to challenge her in ways that made her see herself differently. It wasn't all easy. The expectations were high, and sometimes Maya felt like she was barely keeping up. But every small victory, every task she completed with confidence, every decision she made without second guessing herself, felt like a step towards something more than she had ever imagined for herself. And Liam was always there, not as a savior, but as someone who believed in her potential, someone who was willing to let her figure things out in her own time. One evening, after a particularly challenging day of meetings, Maya was sitting at her desk reviewing the latest documents when Liam appeared in the doorway. He didn't say anything at first. He just stood there, watching her. His presence was always calm. But tonight there was something different about him. Something that made Maya stop what she was doing and look up. "How's it going?" he asked. His voice quiet, but there was a hint of concern beneath the surface. Maya sighed, leaning back in her chair. "It's been a long day, but I'm managing. I think I'm starting to get the hang of it." Liam stepped into the room and closed the door behind him. He walked over to her desk, his gaze steady, almost like he was weighing her words. "You're doing more than managing, Maya," he said, his voice soft but firm. "You're growing. I can see it. I know this job hasn't been easy for you, but you're not the same person who walked into this office a few weeks ago." Maya felt a pang of uncertainty in her chest, but she didn't shy away from his words. She had been afraid of this, afraid of letting herself believe that she was capable of something more than what she had known. "I don't know," she said quietly. "Sometimes I feel like I'm just pretending to be something I'm not." Liam's expression softened, and he reached out, placing a hand gently on the edge of her desk. "You don't need to pretend, Maya. You've always had everything it takes. I've seen it from the beginning." Maya met his gaze, her heart fluttering with an emotion she hadn't allowed herself to feel before. Vulnerability. She had spent so long guarding herself, locking away her fears and insecurities, believing that if she didn't, she would never survive. But with Liam, for the first time, she felt like it was okay to let go of the walls she had built. "I'm scared," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "Scared that I'm going to mess this up. Scared that I'll never be enough." Liam smiled gently, his eyes warm with understanding. "You already are enough, Maya. You don't have to prove anything to anyone, especially not to yourself." The simplicity of his words hit her harder than she expected. She had spent her whole life fighting to prove her worth, to prove that she was more than the sum of her struggles. But now, standing here, with Liam's hand on the desk and his eyes full of unwavering belief, she realized that maybe she didn't need to fight anymore. Maybe, just maybe, she could let herself be seen for who she truly was. Someone worthy of success, of happiness, of love. For the first time in a long time, Maya allowed herself to believe that she was enough. And as the evening stretched on, with Liam standing by her side, she felt a sense of calm settle over her, something she hadn't felt in years. The fear wasn't gone, but it didn't control her anymore. She wasn't just surviving anymore. She was finally living. The story of Maya is a powerful reminder that no matter how much we strive for independence or pride in doing everything on our own, there comes a point when we must allow ourselves to lean on others. It's easy to believe that strength lies in carrying the burden by yourself, but true strength often comes from acknowledging your vulnerabilities and accepting help when it's needed. Maya's journey reflects the internal battle many of us face, wanting to prove ourselves, fearing that asking for help is a weakness, and holding on to our fears and insecurities. Yet, in opening up to the possibility of trust, Maya found not only growth but also a sense of belonging, showing us that it's okay to rely on others and embrace the support they offer. We all deserve to have people in our lives who believe in us, especially when we struggle to believe in ourselves. Maya's story teaches us that asking for help isn't about losing control or giving up. It's about finding the courage to take the next step, even when it feels uncertain. It's about trusting that there are people who want to see us succeed and lifting us up when we need it the most. Now, I'd love to know where you're watching from and hear your thoughts on the story. If you enjoyed this, don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more inspiring tales. Your support means the world to us. Let's keep growing together.